Vanessa Cornell is a teacher and a masterful space holder who convenes women through her groups, courses, and retreats to unlock both our power and purpose. Since her own personal awakening, Vanessa has dedicated herself to giving women the tools and the confidence to step into their power and lead lives of joy and purpose. I honestly could not think of a better time to have you here with me right now in this warm light that we will shine on women. So important. Thank you, Vanessa, for what you do and for being with me here today.
Thank you so much, Heather, for having me.
Yeah, I'm very emotional about women right now. I think I will begin by saying I was so shocked to find how many people don't believe in women in the course of what's been happening. People who I know so well inside and out, but when really push came to shove, they just don't really have the confidence in the power of women and womanhood. And I feel it's an American problem. And I don't know why, but we'll get into that later. But it is an apropos time to have you here. I mean, in 2017, you founded NUSHU. This is a women's community grounded in wellness and empowerment that hosts workshops and online courses and retreats around the world. So, it's important work, but let's get into your story of your personal awakening and how you found your way into this place. I mean, outside, when I was reading about you, I mean, you had a pretty shiny life, pretty great husband, 5 kids, healthy kids. But inside you were disconnected and were questioning your own wants and needs and kind of like, what's next for Vanessa? And I know so many people can relate to that. So I just want to open the floor to you right now to talk a little bit about how we arrived to kind of where you are today.
Yeah, I love that sort of starting off talking about the power of women, because on paper, you would think I had all the things, all the ingredients I needed to have total control of my life and total power, right? I was highly educated. I went to Harvard. I was at Goldman Sachs. I had financial abundance, 5 healthy kids, a healthy marriage. So it's like, how can that person not be able to get exactly what she wants out of life? And yet at that point, I wasn't getting anything I wanted out of life. I had all the things I wanted, but I felt powerless. I felt trapped. I felt totally alone because the one power that I really, really needed was the power of self and the power of what I needed and what I wanted in connection to that. And so when I started NUSHU, I started it from a place of, I have to rediscover who I am in order to step into my power, because what's the point of having power in the world when you don't even know what you want to do with it? You don't even know what you should do with it. And so bringing it back to sort of women as a whole, I see so much in my generation, I'm 47 years old, of educated, resourced women who are paralyzed and trapped and feel no personal power. It feels like the trapped power of a generation of women. And imagine what would happen if we unleashed that power. Imagine how much good could happen in the world if we unleashed that power, and specifically women's power. Because I think that the way that we've defined power is so much about the way the man has defined power. Do you remember the 80s power suits? Yes. Where women would wear those shoulder pads?
Shoulder pads.
Right. Men have broader shoulders. Bigger. Men have broader shoulders than women. So women, to have a power suit, to be powerful, must costume themselves and dress up as men. And I think what's happening now, which is so powerful, is we are not trying to assume that type of power. We are trying to generate our own. And the only way we can generate our own is to sort of lean into what we feel, what we believe, who we are, what we want, without giving that away in favor of some imagined ideal that someone else has determined is what we should want and how we should be in the world.
It's actually mind-blowing because, I have all these things I want to say. I'm usually very, very sure of my words. And I have 6 things I want to say to what you just said, because if we go back in history and we go back in time, when you talk about wardrobe, I mean, that's my wheelhouse, right? As a fashion designer. So you think about Chanel and the time when women started to wear pants right? Because they were at work in the workforce and they needed to be functional. And then she wanted to make it fashionable. And so women were taking the jobs of men that were off at war before women were drafted or allowed to join the armed forces. So then you talked about the 80s and the power suit and, 9 to 5. And all I can see is Dolly Parton and Jane Fonda right now, and Lily Tomlin on my screen, and then we move into the Me Too movement and we move into so many changes. And there's a movie on FX. You can get it on Hulu and all those, but it's called MRS, Mrs. America. And I think it's an important movie for everybody to watch, but especially women. Because it really talks about our history. Go ahead.
The theme I would add to that, because I'm really fascinated by it right now, is how we as women become more powerful as we age, even though everybody is telling us that we lose our power as we age. And I beg to differ. It's just so wrong.
Exactly. I mean, facts is facts, and that's some jacked up facts, because we are only blessed and lucky enough to age, blessed and lucky enough to be in this beautiful life that we live, to gain wisdom through experience and life experience. And what a gift that is, that so many people don't get to live. And so here we are in this moment in time when we can really look back at the history, not of just our nation, of the history of the world, and, where we have been and where we've gotten to and where we're going. It's important. And I think that the shift that's most important is the thinking about how we think about men and women, and especially how women think about women. The only thing that's going to change how men think about women is time and exercise of seeing women in powerful leadership positions.
And I think also for women to own the power that they have, rather than trying to assume the power
of a man,
the type of power of a man, right? The more and more that we show the way that we're powerful, the more the men will say, oh, okay. The enlightened men will say, oh, that's pretty amazing. That's remarkable. I can learn something from that. Can we take both types and blend them and mold them and use them in both ways? There's not only one way.
There's not only one way. And it's very stereotypical. And yes, times they are changing, and where we've been and where we're going, that's evolution and time changes. But when you think about the infrastructure that we're all taught, 2 cats and a dog and, 2.5 kids and the white picket fence, like this dream that we're all told. In that dream, there are 2 players, a man and a woman, traditionally in that dream. Yeah. And there are roles in that dream that balance out a household. And if you ask a lot of men today, who holds their household together, who is the keeper, it's usually the wife or usually the woman in the marriage. And when you look at that, why can't we take that outside of the house and into the world and say, hey, we both have strengths and weaknesses? That's just, I don't understand why that's so difficult for people to do, but they do it. And I want to digress a little, because it's very easy for us to, especially us as women who feel as though we've embraced some sort of our power, to tell the story of treating it differently and owning it and all that stuff. But let's go back to a real reality of being a woman. There was something that you talked about. I don't know, someone was interviewing. I'm not sure what the interview was. You can let us know. But you admit that you used to be a total liar when it came to being vulnerable in front of others. And this is not a liar in the sense that you couldn't trust you or that you were bending the truth. Opposite, what you said was you were keeping your pains, your hardships, your life struggles, and anything that was going on in your internal life close to your chest, close to yourself. And from that, what you created was a very deep, deep loneliness and separation. And we do that. Women do that. And I want to talk about that and how we beat the shit out of ourselves and how we create this lonely existence for ourselves. And why do we do it? And how do we break out of it?
Yeah. So if you're listening and you can relate to this, I want to share sort of this story from my childhood, maybe a lot of your childhoods. I don't know if you've ever experienced as a child being really upset or angry about something and somebody saying, don't make such a fuss.
Mhm.
Don't make such a fuss. Don't be so dramatic. That's really, go do that in your own room. We have been taught from very, very young exactly what the world wants us to be in order to be the good girl, in order to be perceived as desirable, pleasant. We're supposed to be pretty. We're supposed to be pleasant. We're supposed to be accommodating. And that is so consistent, so consistent. And this is why it's so consistent amongst women that the number one thing that we struggle with is to own all of the disowned parts of ourselves that we realized as a child were not the parts that anybody wanted to see. We're not the parts that were going to get us praise. So it makes so much sense that we put all of those parts away. And every single time we disown a part of ourselves and we step into the character that we're supposed to be, we're playing a role, we're creating an avatar, and we're losing more and more touch with who we are. So that's where I was. I was the straight A student. I was so pleasant. I never got angry. I worked really hard. I did all the things I was supposed to do to get the praise. All the signals around me told me I was supposed to be. And I got to a point and I got to a place where I had 5 kids. I had been pregnant, breastfeeding, or both for 8 years. And everybody thought that it was easy.
Yeah.
You make it look so easy. It was not easy. I was dying inside. I needed help. I needed support. I needed to vent. I needed to be frustrated and sad, but I did not allow myself those things because I had no practice. I'd never done it my whole life.
Right.
I was basically keeping all of those truths inside because I thought if I share those, people won't like me anymore.
Right.
It wasn't a conscious thought. Yeah.
Right. Or you can't handle it. Or poor her. Oh my God, look at her. She's struggling with all those kids and all that stuff. It's the person that's like, oh, I'm so sorry. It's more like, I'm so sorry I'm not you. Versus having true empathy toward reaching out. I mean, it takes a community to raise children. We know that. No one person can do it on their own. And so many people are left to that accord.
Yeah. And so what I did was I was like, we're not dribbling out the truth here. I can't. Like I'm about to explode. I live on the Upper East Side of New York. I gathered a bunch of women from the Upper East Side of New York in my living room, and I said, this shiny life that you think I have is a lie.
Yeah.
I just went through the hardest thing I've ever been through. My marriage barely made it through. I basically tried to explode my life, and not a single one of you knew. I didn't call my mother. I didn't call my brother. I didn't call my friends. I held it all inside. But you need to know that what you see in this shiny exterior is not true.
Right.
And if it's not true for me, it's probably not true for her and her and her and her and her. And there was such a sense of freedom of like, oh my gosh, can we drop the facade?
Right.
And I'm the first person to own the gratitude I have for the level of luck, privilege, wonderful life I have. And I really genuinely believe that that gratitude can completely coexist with, I cannot live this way. And not poor you, not poor you. It's like, I cannot live this way. I cannot live completely alone where nobody knows who I am. And in the ensuing months through NUSHU, the company I founded, I realized everyone else was craving the same thing I was craving, which was just to be known, just to be known and seen for who I was. And that is the fundamental thread that connects us as humans.
Yeah.
Knowing each other. Truly knowing each other. And if you never allow people to see anything but your avatar and your character, you are going to be alone. You're going to be lonely.
Yes. And oh God, beautifully, beautifully said. And so well put. You have to be genuine and authentic to live the most genuine and authentic life you can. And that means showing the ugly part, showing the dirty part, showing the vulnerabilities, and showing the unhappiness, and showing when, I mean, like, sometimes I don't have gratitude. Sometimes I really feel like shit, and I feel like, I can beat myself up so badly, and I think that this is a female trait. And I think that we have learned, it's a learned behavior, that because we hold so much inside, we also self-talk, self-doubt, we beat ourselves up. And once you're on that cycle, once you're on that spin, it's almost impossible to get off of it. And it only spins one way, down, down,
Yeah.
down, 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 down.
Yeah. And you know, people are so funny. They're like, you know that phrase, just be yourself.
Mhm.
Just be yourself, like as if that's the easiest thing to be in the
Ew.
world. It's the hardest thing to be in the world, because if you're not yourself and you're rejected, no problem.
Mhm.
Because the thing that was rejected wasn't really you to begin with.
That's
But
right.
if you are yourself, that fear of rejection is really intense. It goes to the core of you. And so developing a tolerance for the possibility of rejection is the work that is required to get to reap the rewards of the connected relationships that you have by truly putting yourself, who you really are, out there. And so I don't want to say like, oh, just be yourself. It's so easy. Like, no, it's really hard work. It requires so much courage, but it is really worth it. It is really worth it. It's not going to protect you from pain. In fact, your life might in some ways become more painful because you know the truth.
Yes,
But
one step forward, two steps back.
but on the other hand, it can become more joyful and connected and alive. And so it's almost like I'm not trying to make your life better. I'm just trying to make the range of your experience greater.
Yes.
But you've
Yeah.
got to also recognize like this is not like a happiness pill. You know, this isn't a
No, life
life.
is hard. But
Life
oh
is
my God,
hard.
we're
Life
not
is
going to make
hard.
your life any easier. But what we hope to do, and what I loved when I found you, I hope to bring some awareness to what the change, the evolution that I truly believe is happening for women.
Yeah.
And that evolution, in order for it to happen for women, it has to happen for men too. And
Yeah.
so that is the piece that I think I want to go back to one thing you were saying about, get to have a stiff upper lip. You know what I mean? Like, don't be so, what was the word that you used that was so perfect when they told us don't be so emotional or whatever they say to women?
Don't be so dramatic.
Thank you. Don't be so
Don't be so
dramatic.
dramatic.
See, I block it out so much. But the
Mhm.
fact of the matter is that at the same time we were told not to be so emotional, boys were also told not to be emotional at all.
Yes.
Right? There was no masculinity in that whatsoever. So the evolution for each of us to empower each of us for our individuality needs to come, even though we're talking about women, it needs to come from everything. It needs to come from all of us, because when we're talking about women, we're always talking about men. When we're talking about men, we always have to be talking about women. And that's a part of the rhetoric that I feel like should change. What do you think about that?
Absolutely. And I think that, you know, men have their own set of conditioning that's extremely challenging for them to deal with in the same way that we do. It's just different. There's just a different flavor of it. Their obstacles are just a little bit different in terms of what society has taught them than us.
Yeah, they were empowered, always powerful. There was always that, right?
Right. But what's not allowed is to be weak for them.
Right.
Not
So
allowed to be weak, not allowed to be sad, not allowed to be vulnerable. We were allowed to be sad and not angry. They were allowed to be angry, but not sad, right? So men have a lot of challenges also. And the fact that I work with women is because I feel like that's my work to do in the world, not because I think it's any more important than men's work. And I actually think women have more outlets now to explore these ideas than men do.
Yes. And most of us who are women, a lot of us, many of us, most of us will have a brother, a son, a father, someone in our lives that we can open a new door to. We have to stop the one-way door that you just said. You can be mad, but not angry. You can be sad, but not angry. You know, you could be sad, but not weak. Like, forget this one-way door. That's not what the human psyche, the human being, the human makeup is about. We are dynamic. And we deal with things. So one of the other things that I want to talk about is when we talk about men and women, I want to talk about our children too, the youth of this world and this country, because we're doing a lot of talking about the youth. And I know that this is important to you, and this was important to me too. And that was about women and parents talking about parenting. And that means godparents, that means aunts and uncles, that means grandparents.
Mhm.
There's so much going on right now generationally, like what we're saying to our grandparents, like, oh God, don't say that to her. That
Mhm.
doesn't work anymore. You can't say that anymore. You can't say, I'm really proud of you. You have to say, you must be really proud of yourself. Like all this rhetoric that we're supposed to say to our children, not supposed to be. As I was watching all of that and trying to be the perfect parent, God forbid, is a terrible thing to try to achieve.
Which is not a thing.
Not a thing. It's a
It's not a
terrible thing
thing.
because it's impossible. And beating myself up when I failed because I was so worried about harming my kids. There's all
Mhm.
this stuff coming at us about, propaganda and truth and facts coming at us about how we're going to ruin our children, that what we're missing was what that was doing to the parents.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I want to talk about that a little bit as we talk about women, because
Yep.
we hold so much as women. And so let's talk about that.
Yeah, so I feel like I'm at a huge advantage because having 5 children, there was no chance I was going to do it perfectly. That was completely off the table. Even doing it competently all the time was off the table with 5 at the same time. I was like, this is just triage. We're just in full on triage. I'm just like, which one's on fire? Let me put the fire out. So I
Right.
feel like I'm actually a better mom to 5 than I would be to 1 or 2 because my MO until parenting was you can do it perfectly, right? You can get 100% on the test. And that's the way that I was taught and raised. The amount of work that you put in, the dedication that you put in is correlated to the outcome. And there is a single achievable goal. And there's a continuum from where you are to that single achievable goal, and it can be measured. This is how we're all trained in school. And then you have children. And bets are off. Bets are off, right? It's
Well,
like
that's right out of the water.
if like school is like a thoroughbred race where one person wins and it's about how fast you are, like parenting is like being in the inner tube on the lazy river with like people trying to bop you off and like you're upside down and you don't even know which direction you're supposed to go in. People are like, what's it like raising teenagers? I say the only thing I can tell you about raising teenagers is I never know what the right thing to do is in every situation. I got to sit with it and think about it. And even when I decide, I'm not sure. So parenting is the place where I think so much of this conditioning really starts to kind of bubble up for us
Yes.
in
Mhm.
really powerful ways. And when we see ourselves in our own experiences reflected in our children, our own fears reflected in our children, even the fears we think are dormant, they are not dormant. They start to really scream at us, right? And so the amount of stuff, the kids are our greatest teachers because everything you think that you've resolved, you have not resolved
Tell you
because when you
different.
have the children will put the mirror up and they will pull all that stuff out. And so, first of all, to anyone who has kids out there, it's so hard. It's so hard. And this idea that we're supposed to do it perfectly, what does that even mean? Or even kind of well, or that there's like you got to like work really hard to be the best parent you can be. It just doesn't apply. It's like trying to, apply trigonometry to an English essay. It just doesn't work. And so we're driving ourselves crazy. We're
We're
driving
driving ourselves
ourselves
crazy.
crazy, crazy. And that word that you said that I'm harming my children. I'm harming my children, And so first of all, I think, when this happened to me in COVID, where it was really hard to figure out what to do with the kids. It was really hard to figure out how they weren't going to be harmed. We were really afraid. How are we going to keep them physically safe? How are we going to keep them emotionally safe? How are we going to keep them mentally safe? How are we going to make sure they continue to learn that they're not damaged by this experience? A lot of parents were in a really tough state. And at one point I thought, oh my God, my brain is on fire. I cannot figure this out linearly or logically. And I said, the only thing that matters is how they feel in this moment. It's the only thing I have the energy to solve for. And so I came up with what has now been my parenting mantra is like, do they feel safe? Do they feel loved? And do they feel seen? And if I'm doing all those 3 things where I feel like at the end, like, notwithstanding my kid being like, you don't love me, you didn't come to my game or something, right? Fundamentally, do they feel loved, safe, and seen? And if I'm doing those three things, I'm doing a really good job.
Right. Take some of the pressure off, because we are going to leave our children with some sort of baggage, just like we were left with some sort of baggage. It's unavoidable.
I always tell my kids, I got to give you something to talk to your therapist about.
Exactly. Well, I was just given the best piece of advice, and I want to share it. It's so good. And I can't wait to hear what you think about it. She said to me that your job as a parent is not to get on the roller coaster with them. It's to wait at the bottom for when they get off.
Absolutely.
And that was like because we do bite the hook. We do get triggered by our children to our own vulnerabilities and what we wanted to do better,
Yeah.
And I think men have that, but I do think that that's a real striving, piece of the pie for women.
It's huge. It's huge. And I think it's the number one thing that interferes with our ability to show up for our kids the way that they need us to.
Yes.
Is we have an inability to have an awareness of what is ours and what is theirs. What is ours becomes so intertwined with what is theirs. And if we don't have the awareness and the commitment to looking at ourselves, to understanding ourselves and our fears and our pain with respect to what our children bring up with us, we think it's them and we put it on them.
Yeah.
And that's not fair. That's not fair to them. And it's not going to foster that kind of a relationship where they feel like, okay, mom is steady for me. This roller coaster is wild, but she's always standing there at the bottom, because when you're on the roller coaster with them, they can't count on you.
No, you're screaming too.
You're screaming too. And sometimes they have got to be like, oh, I got to put my fear aside to take care of my mom's experience.
Yeah, I can't wait for that part to happen.
But when they're older, that's okay. But when they're children, that's not their job, right? Their job is not to take.
I mean, I say to myself all the time, and I even say it in front of my daughter, my husband, I'm like, okay, we're on the level of the teenager. We're biting the hook, like the awareness to come back to the reality that she's going to hate me sometimes. That's just the way it's going to be. And as long as I love those three markers, do they feel safe? Do they feel loved? Do they feel seen? And I'll give a great example. And this is a great segue, because I want to ask you about what you had to give up. You know what I mean? And that I don't even like using that terminology. And that's my own vulnerability as a woman, as a mother, because being a mother is the most important job in the world. How could you ever have given up anything to have the luxury, the privilege, the opportunity, to be home as much as you possibly can with your kids? Mm-hmm. But it is a female situation in most cases. It's not true that it's only female, for sure.
Of course.
But I want to talk about that. So the other day, I got triggered by my daughter, who said, in a fit of rage when she was mad at me, "You're never home. You're never here." In the meantime, I'm always here. I'm always home. But the trigger, because I've given up a lot of what I think I should be doing or was expected of me, or in my head, I kind of want to be doing also, in addition to, I haven't been able to do both in some cases. And I've had to put things on the burner so that I could be here with the privilege that I have being at home. So when I get triggered by a comment that's so obviously a vulnerability for me, I'm going to say, "Are you kidding me? I'm always here." Right away, I'm going to defense instead of saying, talk to the hand, whatever. That's how she feels at the moment. That's a moment. But you went to Harvard. I had a big job too, but I mean, you went to Harvard. You went to an Ivy League college as a female. You were messing with boys on a line that not a lot of girls get to play on. I'm going to be honest. And then for 10 years, you were pregnant for 8 of them, stepped back to be a mom. Can you talk about that? It will become hopefully more and more a male problem, and hopefully society will allow it for both of us to have all and give up some to have, what I'm trying to say. Where
Yeah.
are we right now with this today? I have one in college, and we're going to talk about that because we both sent our eldest to college this year.
We could talk about that for a couple
For
hours,
another
just that.
hour.
I can't wait to talk about that. Yeah.
And one home, and you have five, and I have two. Just lend some lens to this. Where you know where I'm going here. I don't even have to
Yeah.
finish.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, let's talk about some other things that people have said over time. Like, you can have it all. You can have it all, but not at the same time. It's like, you know, I went to Harvard, I was at Goldman Sachs, I was on that train, I was very successful, I worked very, very hard, but I didn't even want what I was working hard for. I
Right.
wasn't even really that interested in it because I hadn't come to the place in my life where I was like, oh, what I like
But I,
matters. What I want matters. I thought I was just supposed to pursue all of the goals that seemed like the goals that everybody wanted for me. So that chapter of my life, while I'm proud of it, I'm not really, those accomplishments don't really mean anything to me.
not the authentic you. It's not true
No,
you are. Maybe if you were studying something else at Harvard, it may have been.
maybe, but I couldn't have because I hadn't come to the place where I had given so much that I had come to my breaking point that split me open to know who I was. So it had to happen in this way. And what has happened is I had that season, then I had the season of just being with my kids, then I had the season of breaking open and starting to say, like, let me actually explore the ideas and the pursuits that really light me up, that make
Yeah.
me feel so interested and alive. And so here's another dynamic. What about a seasonal approach to what we're doing? Not everything at the same time, not always linear from the front, not always how much have you achieved by what age. To me, that's a very linear masculine way, right? What if there's a completely other way? I saw it was on Instagram and YouTube, this woman who in her 80s decided to become a park ranger, and this was her sixth career. And she just leaned into and loved everything she did throughout her life. And at the end of her life, she is going to look back and say, look at what I accomplished. Not look at who I was according to the Forbes 500 at age 30. There's just a totally other way to be. So I don't think of it as giving anything up. I think of it as, what did I get out of that period of life? I got to experience having my children in that way. I got to experience the breaking open. I got to experience the coming into myself as I was raising children, letting them watch me come into myself. So we just have to throw off these ideas of what success means externally, and what we desire has to kind of make its way to the forefront, right? And so you were saying with your daughter, I want to be doing this work, having these conversations out there. And so
Yeah.
that's what you should be doing because that's what you want. And if you are listening and you want to be home with your children and you want to be marinating in that experience, then that's what you should be doing. Damn everybody else who is telling you what you should be doing. Nobody knows but you.
And what if you want to break out of the mold of the privilege? What if you're privileged enough to be at home with your children, but you really are happier working? I mean, that
Yeah,
also, and God forbid a mother make that choice. She would
of
look pretty badly at, you know
Of
what I mean?
course, that's what you should be doing. Of course, that's what you should be doing. Whether your child is loved, safe, and seen does not depend on whether you're working or not or home. There are plenty of people with mothers at home who are so disembodied, who are so unhappy that they
Yes.
cannot see or love their children because they don't have that to give. And
They don't have self-love.
there are plenty of mothers who are working hard outside of the home who do an amazing job at that. So
Yeah.
all of those judgments and or women who decide they don't want to have children.
Hello. Yeah, that's a
How
whole
about
nother
how about that
thing
judgment? How could
with
you
it.
not want children? What's wrong with you? Who's going to take care of you? Those people who are saying those things need to stop because
Yeah.
we are the only ones who get to decide and design our lives according to what we want, not according to what everybody else thinks we should do. Because if you're doing that, you're living somebody else's life and you're wasting the precious time you have.
God willing, we can start to embrace that truth. I say to my kids all the time, I took the pressure off of them to fit into the mold. You know what I mean? Of you have to do these things in this order. And
Hmm.
when you open up the opportunity for them to choose, you really will see their authentic selves shine through.
Yeah. And
Where we want to go.
yeah, and I think that third thing, if you're a parent who really wants to show up for your kids, you're probably pretty good at loved and safe.
Mhm.
Seen is hard.
Seen is
Seen
the
is
hard. I was going to go
hard.
back to scene. I wrote it down. A,
Seen is hard
yes.
because we have a lot of fear around allowing our children to be who they actually are because we on their behalf are concerned they're going to be judged. We on their behalf are concerned they're not going to be able to make a living, and so we have to really do a lot of work on ourselves to recognize when we are trying to steer our children in a certain direction or on a certain path because of our own fears,
Yes.
because of our
Or
own
desires,
concerns
or desires, or
or desires.
eating things that we didn't do in our lives, looking for them to do.
Unfulfilled dreams put on our children. Oh, what a burden. What a burden to them.
Yes. I have a lot of my friends from the Caribbean. I'll tell you what their parents, but they have three choices: a lawyer, a doctor, or something in finance.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. But to be fair, all that comes from a loving place.
oh, of course.
It comes from
Like,
a
how
loving
are we
place. It's
doing
like,
better?
I want you to be stable and safe and have financial security because, not having financial security is a horrible, horrible situation to be in. So, it comes from a loving place, but I think that our
Fear-based, though. It comes
fear-based,
from a fear-based, loving place.
it
And,
does, it
yeah.
does.
And so if we can come from, start to learn pure love. And, obviously there are things in life that throw curveballs at us that you can't ignore. You can't
Yeah,
be like, if I have a lot of financial stress, if I'm living paycheck to paycheck and I have zero independence, it's very easy for us to sit here and be like, try to push that under. You can't
yeah,
do that. But what we can try not to do is to then infiltrate our children with that fear.
yeah,
Recognize it's a fear that we have, it's part of our life that we're dealing with, but try not to infiltrate it into their life, but let them understand life is hard. We try
yeah,
to protect our children so much from pain.
yeah.
Like that's the whole roller coaster thing. They need to be up there screaming their head off, scared to death. And then you can come back there to be the safety. You can't be holding their hand all the time when it's scary.
Yeah, and I've had to really reframe that for myself, which is when they're no longer in my home, I can't hold their hand. So every time they experience disappointment, sadness, upset, fear, I think to myself, great.
yes.
I'm so glad that they have had the chance to have this experience with me at the bottom of the roller coaster.
Yep.
As many as we can get, even though in the moment I'm saying these words and I don't
Yeah,
really
they
believe them.
kill. Like the
I'm
bullet
like,
wound
this
is
is this
seeping.
is this is wonderful that my child is absolutely miserable and I don't actually really believe my words in the moment. But I try really hard just to just say like, this is necessary. This is
Yeah, this is like,
necessary for them to grow up. And then of course, there is a line where it's beyond just sadness and an intervention is required, right? Like if it's depression or if
yeah.
there are lines that we have to recognize as parents, we have to intervene. But in a lot of the ordinary roller coaster of emotions, our job is just to say, "Oh, I'm so sorry, that sucks. I'm
Yeah,
here.
that's
I'm
what's
here.
yeah.
That
And
sucks.
guess what?
I'm
And it's
here."
gonna get better. That I can promise you, it won't stay
Yeah,
like this.
it won't last forever. Yeah.
It's gray right now, but the sun is still behind that gray sky. There's still a sun up there. It's
Hmm.
remember that in the moment. But yeah, that's I think part of it. And I think, as women, whether you're a parent, whether you're not a parent, there's still that empathetic side, that fixer. I'm going to fix it. I'm going to
Hmm.
make it, I'm going to make it perfect. And I love what you said about not what you've given up, but what you've gained, because I too look at it like that. The pandemic came and it changed a lot for a lot of people, but there were so many gifts in it,
Hmm.
But whether it's the pandemic or just a choice or a circumstance or something that happens in life, like you kind of really do have to try to lean into the belief that the universe has your back, that, things are meant to come your way, and these challenges and the opportunities and the choices that, God willing, we get to make are all for a dance. It's all a bit of for a reason. And if we can, as females, hold on to our empathy in a powerful way, and I want to go back to what you said, and not try to be men, which is like, there's a huge thing to say. Like, that's what we've been doing for generations, for centuries.
Mm-hmm.
Equity, equality, put us on the line. You know what I mean? Be it a front line, the office line, the whatever line. Let us be counted. And, we've had to kind of like, powerfully work our way to where we are today. And the work isn't done. And go ahead.
But it's like, don't put us on the front line. Let us be the weavers and the conveners.
Let us be where we're supposed to be within the puzzle. Front line,
and the holders,
middle of the line. Let us just, right?
Yeah. And I can do all the masculine stuff, right? I can, you give me a problem, I can solve it, I can fix it, I can linear it, I can do all those things. And so it's not about disowning that part of ourselves, but it's about the part of ourselves that has not been taught to be cultivated.
That's it.
And we have all those skills in spades. What we don't have is the other skills to be cultivated. And so much of what I do in my work is to put people in groups together, because it's that power of the connection of the group that we have not been taught is powerful or important.
Let's talk about that a little bit, because so what are some of the issues? Well, I want to talk about holding space. I think that's a perfect segue for this right now, and what that really does mean to you. What are you doing within your workshops? And, what does that mean to your online community? What does that mean to your in-person retreats, holding this space within a group environment, which is what you're talking about?
Yeah. So I hold space in a lot of different ways. Online, as you said, in retreats, in groups. The most recent retreat I did was a mastermind retreat. So I took leaders in the wellness business, thought leaders, founders, practitioners, and basically created a space for them to bring all parts of themselves online. Not just the leader who's got it figured out, who's got a really big business, but the doubtful parts, and the fearful parts, and the people think I'm this, but I'm that parts, and created a space where we basically were very explicit about the ground rules of how we were showing up for each other. This is how I create these containers or these groups very, very quickly through techniques and prompts that bring people to a place where they're like, oh, here I can be fully myself. Here is a unique place where all of the things that are circling in my mind, my doubts, my fears that I have, but I've never told anybody, they can all come to bear here. And I can let these people see the whole me. And so the opportunity for incredibly deep connection in a very short amount of time can be created if you know how to do it in these groups. And that's really what I've spent the last decade honing, is the ability to create that level of intimacy and connection in an empowered space. I don't say a safe space, right? Because I can't guarantee that you're not going to be upset by something.
Right.
But I can guarantee that I will give you a space where you can be empowered to take care of yourself, to be upset by it, to be in dialogue. And so these spaces become the first place for some people where they've ever experienced being who they are without fear of judgment or rejection. And then they're like, oh, I can be that out in the world too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I've done a lot of rewarding things in my life, but I think I have to say probably one of the most rewarding things that I do are my retreats.
Yeah.
To have a short period of time, whether it's a weekend or 10 days or 2 weeks even, but that short period of time, a window to focus on a human being, to focus on a place that is full of empathy. And you say something, you talk about when you offer your retreats, you offer soul and heart centered retreats. And
Mm-hmm.
that could be just some rhetoric, but I wanted to talk about that because it is where women can be seen and when women can be heard, but we would never run a retreat for a man that said soul and heart centered,
I
right?
would.
Okay, what? So
I would. I
talk
would.
about it. How do we, how do we
Yeah.
talk language where everybody feels a part?
Yeah. So I think that the reason I love retreats is because there are a lot of ideas that we find appealing and interesting. The universe has our back, or self-love is important, or we have to love ourselves first. And so the ideas are really interesting to us, and our intellectual mind is like, that makes so much sense. But our nervous system and our body and our soul and our heart is like, give me proof.
Mhm.
I need evidence. I don't really fully believe you. I cannot shift fundamentally the way that I am in the world and my trust of the world just based on words. The
Right.
Instagram quote that comes across your feed is not going to change you fundamentally. And I always say that if you read it and you relate to it, it's something you already knew.
Yes.
It's not new. You relate to it because you already know it. And so all of these ideas are great, but until you are in a room with other human beings and your whole being, your nervous system can gather evidence from other nervous systems. When you say something in a group like, I'm really ashamed of this part of me that I've never shared with anybody, and you look around and you see the facial expressions and you can feel, oh, I receive love when I say something like that, not rejection. None of those ideas really click fully. None of those ideas become embodied. None of those ideas are really able to catalyze true change until they become embodied. And so I think that's why retreats are so powerful, because we are not beings that only live in a mental intellectual space. We are embodied beings. And the only way to relate to other embodied beings is in human form, in person. There's a lot that can be done online. There's a lot of
Right.
amazing work that can be done online, but you can't text your way to personal transformation.
No, and you can't reach the space between that way. You can only reach the space between the words, when you're in physical contact with somebody, I feel like,
Yeah.
what I mean by that is, you can drop the idea. Okay, let's go back to your quote for a step. I read a quote and it resonates with me. It makes me happy. It makes me say, "Yeah, damn, that's right." It makes me mad. It makes me relate to it, or it could even make me cry.
Mhm.
Right? The quote has a triggering effect to us. So that's the seed, right? That's the seed of awareness. Like you already knew that, and it's reminding you, or it's opening the door of that awareness to you. The next step to me is the space between. It's holding that idea and then being within society, being with people and practicing that idea,
Mhm.
whether it's in
Mhm.
silence. Like I learned a lot about this because my retreats really didn't start as retreats. They started as high altitude mountain climbs where it was kind of like, we use the mountains as metaphors, although we were
Yeah.
very much in the environment. The wheels are going to fall off at, 20,000 feet or less at some point.
Yeah,
And
I do the same thing in my surf retreats. I use
oh,
the ocean as my mountain. It's an
we got to
incredible
do something
teacher.
together, girl. I love
That'd be
it.
fun.
Mountains in the sea, baby. That's what it's all about, right? so So I think that I want to talk a little bit about, we talked a lot about mothering and, that sort of thing, but let's just talk a little bit about some of the paradoxes of women and where we have difficulty, some of in the spaces that you hold, some of the issues that you see really harder for women. Like what is hard for us to come out of, grasp onto, understand, break through,
Yeah.
for the listeners.
Yeah. I mean, when I say to people, what are you most afraid of?
Mhm.
I'll bring people into a group for the first time and I'll be like, let's just put it out there. Like, what are your fears? What are your
Yes.
fears?
Yes.
And most people will say fear of judgment,
Mm-hmm.
fear of judgment. And when I think about fear of judgment, what I think is I'm afraid what other people will think of me. I get it. I'm afraid what other people, like, that's very human. How very human to be afraid what other people think of me. But if you really kind of come down to it, what you're really saying is what other people think of me is who I am.
That's right. I believe it. I believe what people think about me.
What not just I believe, it fundamentally is the makeup of who I am. And so what's the alternative to that? The alternative to that to me is there is a me that has always been here that I just have forgotten because I've been so worried about meeting other people's expectations of who I was. And so to me, the antidote is a real practice of saying, how do I get to know again the me who has always been here, who I have forgotten?
Right.
And the methodology that I use for that is very, very simple, but quite confronting to a lot of people, which is 3 questions. How do I feel? What do I need? And what do I want? I ask women those questions, and sometimes they're just like, I, I don't know. I don't know. And they have a lot of shame about that. Like, how can I not
Yeah.
even know what I want and not what I need and know what I need? And I say, don't be ashamed. You've been training yourself for decades to numb yourself, ignore what you need and what you want in service of being accepted and being praised and being loved. And so if it takes you a second to try and unlearn decades of training, don't be hard on yourself. That makes so much
Right.
sense to me. And so to me, that fundamental place of I need to know who I am again was where I came to, and I think is at the core of everything. But you talk about challenges, paradoxes, stumbling points for women, and then women go to, but that's so selfish.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
That's so selfish. How can I indulge myself in knowing myself when my kids need so much and my partner needs so much and my work needs so much? That feels like, well, maybe if I have a little sliver of time at the end of the week, if everything else is done, I might take a moment to do that. And so I know a lot of people have been talking about self-care. I think that's great. You know, I had a self-care dinner when I first started 8 or 9 years ago, and everyone's like, what's self-care? I've never
Yeah.
heard of such a thing, you know, and all of a sudden now everybody's only talking about self-care, but it's not about just, you know, the massages and the glasses of wine with your friends and all of those things. It's about this fundamental shift to say, what I need, what I want, what I feel matters.
Yes.
I don't always have to get what I need or get what I want, but I have to sometimes get what I need and I want. And I have to be willing to ask myself those questions, even if they're uncomfortable, because if I don't ask them over and over again, I'll never unlearn this ignore what you need, ignore what you want
Yes.
way that I've been raised. And
Yes.
to me, just the asking of the question is actually important because when you ask yourself, how do I feel, even if you don't have an answer, you are implying, but I care what your answer is.
Yes.
It matters how you feel and what you
Right.
need and what you want. And
Right.
so this kind of commitment to the practice of starting to reacquaint ourselves with the me who has always been there. And I have a lot more, I have so much more to say about how this happens. It has to do with pursuing joy and, you know, not glorifying sacrifice and martyrdom.
Yeah.
But it really comes down to this reacquaintance with the self. And then once, and this is such a female thing, right? It's so tied to our intuition.
Yes.
This reacquaintance in the self, this kind of wise woman, this woman who knows inside of us, she is very powerful. She is
Right.
very powerful. She knows what to do and she can do it if we can start to reacquaint ourselves with her.
100%. You said something that I think was really important. I was trying to find it in my notes and I can't find it, but you talked about what you love. And first was yourself. Second was your work and your job, and third was your family. And I'm not going to put them in the order of importance. That was just first,
Yeah.
second. But I want to say something about the order of importance because I liked when I read it that you first said that you loved yourself. And I think that that is a very difficult thing for not just women, but for anybody to do, especially if you are a parent or you're caring for an elderly person or whatever like that. We never put ourselves first. Why
Yeah.
do we feel that is a selfish thing to do? I mean, the proverbial oxygen mask. I'll never forget when I was on a plane for the first time and I learned that the parent puts the mask on first. It took me a minute to understand that. Like, what do you mean? You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like, shouldn't the child be saved first? If we cannot save ourselves, if we cannot be in our best light, we're never going to be in the best light for other people.
Yeah, and I think it's beyond the oxygen mask. I think it's more
Please,
fundamental
I'm
than
so
that.
tired of that metaphor. Give me a new.
Yeah, no, it's like we kind of think that like there's a pie and we have to split it up.
Yes.
And to a certain extent there is, right? But here's
Hours in
how
a day.
here's how big your pie is. If you have been disconnected from your soul purpose, your sense of self, your deep creative power, the you have always been, the soul that was born into the world gets cut and cut and cut and cut by 1,000 cuts every time you disown yourself to try and become a little perfect curated image of who you thought you should be. And so, yeah, your pie is freaking small in that place. And so the reason I know that I love myself first is because when I can be in connection to that self, my bandwidth, my creative energy, my flow, my joy, my generosity is huge. I really have so much to give. And it's not like I put myself first so I can fill my cup so then I can empty my cup. I don't like that one either. It's like the cup is a static size. No, let's look at like the creative flow of my energy when I'm aligned with who I am is boundless. And it changes everything. And so the reason I can put myself first is because I'm not under any illusion that there is a dynamic where one takes from the other. It's just not true. We've been lied to. It's not true. It doesn't
One
exist.
cannot take from the other. That is the most profound thing ever. And I for sure have been going through life, stacking it. I've
Yeah.
been living linear, like I really have been living linearly. When I look at it, when you say it in those words, one thing does not take from the other. It's the
No.
exact opposite, quite frankly, right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like the car engine, all the pistons have to go, not just some of them. You can't have some of them working and some of them not working.
Yeah, I really think, and I've gathered evidence for myself over this, that this is my own belief system. Not everyone believes this. This is my own belief system, right? Like I think that we are put on the earth with a particular soul imprint of what we're supposed to do. And it's where we're born, it's our karma, it's what gifts we've been given, what gifts we have not been given, what challenges we've been given. And to the extent that we can always recognize where something or someone has taken us off that path. Oh, I need to be that. I veered from the path. I'm afraid of that. I veered from the path. And if we can start to undo all of those layers of conditioning that have taken us away from who we've always been, it's like a creek where if you're always trying to be somewhere else, you go, I'm going to get stuck in all the little eddies on the way. But there is a path. There is a path that's meant for you that has so much in it for you. It
Right.
has
Power.
so much power. It has so much flow. It has so much generosity. It has so much, I don't give a shit about stuff that's not important in it. The amount of energy and time that we spend on things that if we're in that flow and in that self-love and in that flow of generosity, we look at it and it comes our way and it just like bounces off. It's just
That's
like, I
really
got no time for that. Zero time. Like that's so cute that you think you can embroil me in that drama. I got no
right.
time for that, And
No.
so it's generative. it's generative. Like our pie's getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And we're like, you can have a piece and you can have a piece and you can have a piece and you can have a piece. And it's like
And I'm not giving
inexhaustible.
up any because I'm giving you one and you one. It's all there to give because it's
Uh,
fulfilled, it's enriched, it's real, it's
yep.
authentically you.
Yeah. And I'm fed. And I'm fed. I'm making sure that I'm fed. And when I mean boundless generosity, I don't mean you're doing everything for everyone, because part of this is like, oh, you want me to do that for you? I can't. I'm tired. I'm
Yeah.
tired, right? Like boundless energy, boundless generosity in the soul sense, finite energy and time in the body sense, in the physical sense, right? And it's like, I will do so much for other people, but never at my expense, never at the expense of my, peace and energy and feeling okay. I'll never let myself, here's what I think self-care is. I will never let myself not be okay. I will always fight for my own okayness, right? And not all the time, right? Like, okay, I got to stay up with my kids and I got to do homework with them and I'm really tired this week. Okay, next week I'm going to take care of myself. My needs are always on the table.
Right.
I'm never willing to self-abandon and abandon
It's the
my own
season,
needs.
like you said. If not today, it's tomorrow. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And looking at it in that way, I think that that's important. If not, if the time is not now, then the time will be, and not letting it then be, something that you can't grasp in your hands. Let it be fleeting, but that you
Mhm.
actually go back to it. I love that you said self-care is not massages because it's funny how it began.
Mhm.
The
I
idea of
mean, sometimes it's massages, but it's definitely not just massages.
massage.
Yeah.
It's not,
Yeah.
well, and I think it's more the idea of the massage. Like, yes, a massage is good for your body for many, many reasons. But the idea of going to get the massage
Mhm.
is what we've labeled as self-care. And really what that really is taking time out for yourself and also to discover what you need. Is it a massage because you really need good circulation and touch, human touch, and to be
Mhm.
cared for? Is it a walk in nature? Is it time with girlfriends, not time alone in solitude, but actually time with people?
Yeah,
And
is it saying no to that thing that somebody asked you to do that you really don't want to do that you think you should do?
that's a new thing because I was one of those people that I was a very busy person. Always,
Mhm.
I still am a very busy person. And I try to make myself more and more busy. That's all I can say. It's something
Yeah.
that I know why I do it. I know the driving quality and I know where I came from. Now I
Mhm.
have to, and I know why I have this trait. And now I have to work at, is that healthy for me? Is it good for the people around me? Always driving. And did it serve me at one point in my life really well? And it
Yeah.
doesn't serve me anymore. And
Yeah.
so recognizing those shifts and those changes are self-care. Like
Yeah.
that's the
Totally.
right, the true voice. And I want to talk about a couple more things. I mean, I keep you on this podcast for 7 hours, but self-trust. I think that there are two things. You did something on your Instagram and you wrote it so beautifully. And there were two things that you were talking about. And one was self-trust and one was playing small. And these are female, for me, they were very
Yeah.
female oriented and female traits. Can you talk about what the advantages are of self-trust and what the advantages are, and how to break free from playing small, or how you can use it to your advantage? Like what are the positives and negatives in the flow, yo?
Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk about self-trust. So your listeners might be able to relate to this. When you've got a situation and maybe you're a worrier, right? So you're like kind of afraid that something is going to happen. You're worried that something's going to happen to
Yeah.
yourself, to someone you love, to one of your children. And so what your mind does is it starts to pre-plan. Let me run through the scenario so that if something bad happens, I know what to do. But something that hasn't happened yet, we can't know what happens, right? So we have to run through every possible scenario over and over and over again in order to be prepared for the thing that has not happened yet and might never happen. And so the amount of energy that it takes to prepare for something that has not happened yet is kind of infinite. You can play that in your mind over, right? I'm sure there are people who are like, yep, I do that. I lie in bed at night and I can't sleep and I'm looping it, looping it, looping it, looping it. And so what self-trust does is it says, Have I done all the things I can do right now, right? Because there is such thing as like, if you're worried for the safety of your child as he's going to Europe, do you have the phone numbers and the insurance, right? There are actionable things that you can put in place to say, okay, and now I have done all the things that I can do. And I trust that if something happens that is not what I want to happen, that I will rise to meet that situation so that we can get out of this endless loop of worrying, of pre-planning, of pre-playing out what hasn't happened yet. And what happens in our nervous system is it doesn't know the difference between it happened and it hasn't happened.
Right.
And so we are suffering
in fight or flight all the time.
We are in fight or flight and suffering through something that may never even come to pass. And so developing this idea of self-trust is like, do I believe that in that moment I can rise to meet whatever happens, is a key component of releasing the worrying and all of the fixing that we do to try to feel like we have some control over the future, which is fundamentally impossible to control.
Right. I mean, you got to talk to the control freak on that one because I mean, I'm a planner, right? So I like to plan everything out and then I allow for room. Like if, two restaurant reservations, I mean, like it's kind of gross. Like I am like a super planner and my husband is not. Yeah. He's really a fly by the seat of his pants, kind of figure it out as we go. You can just imagine who packed the diaper bag in the day. You know what I mean? And we figure out that flow together, but I tend to feel that that's a masculine feminine association as well.
Yeah, it can be. But I think it probably is a lot. We're the ones who are in the details and making sure that everybody gets what they need, right?
Yes.
We're really, especially with children.
Has a good time.
Yeah, and has a good time because we take responsibility for everyone else's experience.
Yes.
That is a heavy load. If you're exhausted and you're a control freak and you take responsibility for everyone else having a good time and their experience, of course you're exhausted.
Yeah. Take a look at that truth. Take a look at the reality that you're creating for yourself, right?
Yeah, that is a lot of work, especially because in this loop of I am trying to impact something that is fundamentally out of my control. Somebody else's experience will never be in my control. I can never direct fully, but I can try my hardest. And wow, is it a lot of work to try and engineer somebody else's experience of an experience. And so I think as women, we are just spinning our wheels on all of this stuff rather than saying, I trust that as the situation arrives, I will meet it. And I trust that that person is capable of having their own experience that I do not need to fix or manage. That's a hard one with our families and our children. But I have trust in you. But what happens is when we try to fix people, especially our kids, the message that we're giving them is, I don't trust you. Right. I don't trust you to be able to rise up and meet this situation. I have to find a way to not only control my reality, but your reality. Right. And so it's a very disempowering message when we're trying to fix everything for our children, when we're saying, I don't really believe in you. I don't really believe in your ability to handle this with my help, right? It's different to help, to be there as a sounding board, to be there as a support system. It's not like we're throwing our children out and saying, figure it out on your own. But that's a very different energy than fixing, to say like, this is a hard situation. I am here for you. Let's talk about it. But what do you think you should do?
What an incredible discussion. I do want to talk about two more things before I let you go. I want to talk about playing small because I feel there's two sides to that for me. When I was looking at it, I think sometimes I need to play small. Like sometimes I need to diminish myself because I have been so used to being the hard charger, so used to having the answers, so used to controlling everything that my playing small is relinquishing some of that control and allowing myself to not be the big voice in the room and have all the answers and do that. The other way of playing small is what I look at my career, when I look back at my career where I've let the man, mansplain, repeat what I've said, and I just didn't say anything about it. Now I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, that's just what I said. That's exactly what I just said. I'm glad we agree. Like I can't just let it go anymore because and it's not even in a mean way, and I don't have to say like, oh, you just mansplained me. It's just an apparent shift where I'm like, yeah, that's exactly what I said. I'm glad we're on the same page. Or
Yeah.
I start with the positive. I'm glad we're on the same page because that's exactly what I just said. Where
Yeah.
I
So
allow that. Go ahead, tell me.
yeah, I want to talk about that first example where you're like, I've been felt the need to be big and push. And
Yeah,
so I kind of want to, I don't see it as playing small. I
tell
see
me.
it as I want to listen more. I just want to like learn and listen a little bit more. And so to me, and I said this on my Instagram a bunch of times, like sometimes the wisest, most confident person in the room is the one that's the most quiet.
Yes.
And
Oh
it's
yeah.
not small. It's not like I'm
No,
I'm not saying something I need to say because I'm worried about how people will judge me. It's like sometimes you don't need to say it.
you're taking the
You
quiet
don't
role.
you don't
Powerful silence. You don't need to say it.
because a lot of times when people are saying things, it's not from a place of confidence, it's from a place of insecurity. See how smart I am? See what
Yeah.
I know? I belong in the room. I'm valuable here, right? So it's very subtle where you can say like, you know what? I might have something to say here, but I don't have to say it.
Right. At
I don't
all. I can
have,
wait till the end or I can leave because you know what? Sometimes when you wait, especially if you're an alpha like me, the conversation finds its way to that end without you having to interject or be the quick thinker in the room.
yeah.
People
I
get
sit on a bunch of boards and I think I'm a really good board member because I only say something when it's additive to the conversation.
yes,
When it
yes,
when it helps the discussion, right? And so you'll sit in boards and one person will say something and then another person will say the same thing and then the third person will say the same thing. It's like, oh, you needed us to know that you saw that too, you
right.
know? And so it's a little bit of that energy of like, I don't need to prove how smart I am to you. I don't need to prove anything to you. I know. I know. And in this situation, I'm only going to say something for the right reason, not for the wrong reason. So I don't think it's playing small. I
Yeah.
think it's settling into your confidence in what you know and what you can contribute and not needing to prove it to anybody anymore.
I love that settling into my confidence. Because I think as a female, to be heard, to be seen, I had to be just, loud and
Yeah,
proud,
for
you know.
sure.
And
For
so
sure.
now,
And you know what? You probably did. You were
yeah, I
probably
did. I definitely did.
absolutely spot on correct about that. Right.
Yeah.
And that's what's great about getting a little older and getting a little wiser and getting a little more powerful, where it's like, that is true that I had to do that. And now I don't have to do that anymore.
Yeah, it's time to be quiet, time to observe, time to listen. Because the more that I listen now, the more I actually have to say. And isn't that
Yeah.
incredible? Because what
Yeah.
you're saying is you're considering it, and then what you say has that much more weight, that much more meaning, that much more consideration. And
Yeah.
and I think that that's really, really important.
But there's a different type of playing small, right? There's a different type of playing small, which is probably for a lot of women, informed by experiences that they had when they were a girl. Like it's shocking to me with all of my self-awareness work that it took me years and years and years to remember the time in high school where I was in a group of girls and we were this friend group and we were supposed to room together. I went to boarding school and then they came to me and they said, "We're all rooming together, but not with you."
Right.
And they kicked me out of the group, right? Like probably women have some version of that experience
Oh
of
yeah.
being kicked out of the group, of being rejected. It's so painful when you're a child. And I also remember in my head very,
Even when
very,
you're an adult.
even when you're an adult, I also remember in my mind very, very clearly when I was a child, I did ballet and I had good posture. And I remember very clearly people were like, "You're high on yourself. Vanessa,
Yes.
she's so high on herself." Right. And I was like, "I'm what? I'm what?" But I was like, oh, I get it. If I'm confident and I'm shiny and I'm bright, people
Yes.
won't like me. So obviously, the right answer is to turn the dial down, way
Yes.
down. Be incredibly humble, be incredibly generous, be incredibly giving, support other people. Don't shine the light on you. Don't want the spotlight. Don't be that aggressive one, right? Like I learned very young how not to become rejected by basically dimming my light all the way
That's right.
down,
That's right.
all the way down. And by the way, even as an adult, not easy to turn that light up because there's a lot of people who don't want that for you.
That's
But
right.
again, this is the benefit of being older when you're like, there are a lot of people in this world, and I have cultivated real relationships with so many people who want good for me that when you give me that negative feedback, I am unmesswithable. Usually I replace mess with a different word that starts with an F and
Yeah,
ends with
you
an
can
U.
swear on my
Yeah,
podcast.
I am unfuckwithable.
Yes.
Like I have so much going for me in my life. I have so much fullness and so much love and so much energy and so much excitement and so many ideas that you thinking like you trying to tear me down, I don't even look your way. I
Yep.
don't have time for you, you know?
Right.
And so it is kind of a reemergence that I think happens a lot for women in their 40s when all of that fear of being rejected has started maybe to metabolize a little bit so that we can say like, yeah, that might still be true that people will reject me for that, but I got all these people over here who are going to love me for it and I don't have a choice anymore. I can't be that. I'm so tired of being that person you wanted me to be. I've done it for decades. I can't do it anymore. I'm done.
Yeah.
I'm done.
Love me or leave me. I mean, honestly, like there comes to a point where there's certain things that certain people or there's certain things that I listen to and I really listen to innately. And I say, wow, that's something I want to pay attention to. And then there is that Teflon, that water, like water on a duck's back that I've been able to curate again for myself. See, when I was young, oh, honey, you couldn't touch me. I
Mm.
I try to empower that younger, that 20-year-old Heather
Mhm.
often because as much as we gain power and incredible life experience as we age, we also can get traumatized
Yeah.
and also get beat down a little bit by life. And
Yeah.
so I now in life, after some trauma, after some, hitting the mat pretty hard, I I empower that young Heather again. You know what I mean?
I
To not
love it.
shit.
So it's almost like when I see people who are like, I don't even know what I want. I don't even know what I need. I'm like, that's amazing. Do you know what's ahead of you?
Yes,
Do you, right? It's that with women.
exactly.
It's like God, we've given up so much, and so much of life has been sort of, put in a corner for us. But how amazing, right?
Yes.
How incredible. What an opportunity. It's like if you're like, well, you've lived 90% of life, there's only 10% to go. It's like, all right. But it's like, oh my
Yeah.
God, there's so much. And so I think about, my 40s and 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s. And I'm like, oh God, there's so much life to live. And if we've given ourselves up, if we've given everything of ourselves up in pursuit of being the perfect or excellent parent, and we've defined ourselves only in that way, when our children leave, they're left with that burden, and our relationship can't evolve out of that. And
Right.
so we become the stereotypical, annoying, needy mother or mother-in-law. And that is not who I'm going to
Failed
become.
to no.
Hell no.
That will not be me. I'm going to be the hippest granny you ever saw. And
Yep.
God willing. And I love that. And I think that is really, really an important point to reflect on. And I'm so grateful that you brought that up because it's again that textbook of like you're supposed to do this first and then do that second and this is how it's supposed to be and you're supposed to be the parent to your child, not friend your child. But there's a time that role playing actually shifts and you do want to become the friend to your child and no
Yeah.
longer the parent and have a different sensibility. And then there's those parents who want to be the friend early on, and it's like the boundaries. It's like just keep trying, just
Hmm.
keep working, just keep living, just keep learning,
Yeah.
and do not doubt yourself. I mean, that
Yeah.
like how I started the podcast is kind of how I want to end it. I don't care what your political belief is. I do not care at all for this conversation. To not think a woman has the power to run our nation and is a very, very sad, sad, sad state of affairs.
Yeah.
And I don't care what the policies are. I have met people that simply will not vote for a woman in a leadership position.
Oh, it's still very real, for sure.
It's real. And I mean, I call this the Windex era because we can see really truly through the glass. There's no more smoke and mirrors, there's no more whitewashing of things. There's no more retelling of histories. There's no more thinking your neighbor. Now we really can see what people's beliefs are. And the division is so grave in the sense that we're arguing about things we're not even arguing about a topic. You know what I mean? Like, we're just arguing for the sake of power.
We're soothing our fears through argument.
There you have it. It's power, fear, right? Exactly. So it's fear-based. All these arguments are fear-based. And I really do believe that if we can start to, and I'm sad to tell you that some of these people that I'm talking about are women. I think that that's the most important caveat that I make that I don't think I made. Brady's probably assuming that I'm talking about dudes. I'm talking about women who don't believe in women. And that has been probably the biggest devastation of all of it for me, because I can't understand why. I can understand, but I want to be a part of a catalyst that changes that thought process.
Yeah.
So I'm very, very proud to be on your hay wagon right now. And with our signs of women's power and the belief in the system that we are one and that we all work best together. We're strong. Together we have everything. Singularly, we have nothing, literally.
Yeah.
I love that. Okay. Well, and I love you, Vanessa Cornell. Where can everybody else who loves you on this podcast find you? And tell them
so kind.
Find your retreats. And before we go, most importantly, because we're going to talk about your company, I want to talk about what is NUSHU stand for. So you have to close with a little bit about you.
Definitely. So I'm half Chinese, and so NUSHU is women's language. Literally women's language in Chinese. And it was a language that women developed in ancient China to communicate with each other when they were denied education.
Interesting.
Not for the men, only amongst the women. It was a written language. It was written on fans, embroidered in the inside of robes when women left the village. So it's this kind of mysterious, hidden, no one knows that much about it language that existed. And so I went to all these fancy branding companies and they were like, you don't need us. You already have the name. It's so obvious. It's women's language. It's how we are with each other. So that's NUSHU. NUSHU is the company through which I run all of my retreats. And so that's NUSHU.com, NUSHU.com. And everything else I do, my courses, my speaking, is VanessaCornell.com. And there is a special gift for your listeners, VanessaCornell.com/Heather. And it is a little bit of an audio and a little bit of a written out of my daily practice of how I kind of have over the last decade reacquainted myself with myself. And so if any of your listeners are interested, you can find that on the website.
Well, thank you so much for that. I love that. Thank you so much. That's so generous. And I really hope that you guys will take advantage of it. Take a listen, take a look, link into the chain. That's really what it's about. We've got to link into the chain together. I love NUSHU. We had it here in America during the Equal Rights Amendment. Women were talking to each other through certain languages, and I don't know what the name of it is. I think there was notes and there was like an uprising. And so I think that that's a beautiful language, but we don't have to hide anymore. We don't have to embroider our messages inside our clothing. We can speak out loud, and please don't quiet your voice. Keep speaking. Don't be small. Own your confidence. And I
That's
thank you
right.
for all your amazing encouragement and your tips and the work that you do. And I'm so happy for you and proud of you for finding your true authentic self, because now you can shine that warm light that I talked about at the beginning of this podcast here on all of us in the name of women and for women. Thank you, Vanessa Cornell, so much.
Thank you so much, Heather. This was so much fun.